Welcome back, chess kids. Fun Master Mike is here. I'm so happy to have you in YouTube land. You're a good chess kid, right? You've already subscribed to our channel. Wait, you haven't? Please go ahead and do that. Just click right there, or there. You'll find it because you're a smart chess kid. Today, we're going to take a look at an endgame that one of my students got into, and even I made a mistake. It just goes to show you, it never hurts to study the basics. Sometimes when kids get to king and pawn endgames, especially advanced kids, they think, there's just a king and some pawns. This is going to be easy. But I submit to you, dear viewer, you need to be more careful and more calculating. The simple fact is, when you're on move 4 of a chess game, you don't really know what your opponent's going to do. But in an endgame with just kings and pawns, there's so few choices by your opponent, you should be able to calculate nearly till the end of the game. Okay, so we're black in this position, and my student did not play a great move. In this position, he should have calculated a little bit more. He's in trouble. His king is here. If his king makes any move at all, he loses this pawn. And once you lose the pawn, you pretty much lose the game. It looks like he's out of moves. And in this position, he played the move h6. Now, I was taught growing up, if you're trying to stop a passed pawn from your opponent, putting your pawns in this sort of V formation, if I can draw a little V right there. Did I get it right? Hey, that's almost a V. Let's go there. My drawing skills aren't so great. But if you make a V with your pawns, it's nearly impossible for your opponent to make a passed pawn. Even if white had like an extra F pawn on that square, put your pawns in a V and you'll be okay. But the problem here is not stopping your opponent from making a passed pawn. The problem is running out of moves, and white is going to run black out of moves. If white takes the pawn and black takes back and then white pushes, which is what happened in the game, now black is just lost, because black has been run out of moves, and no matter where your king moves, this king will just take. And even though you can get the opposition, white will push, run you out of moves again, and if your king goes this way, white invades, and if your king goes this way, white invades, and white's going to win. Now, one thing I do want you to notice, in this position, if it was white's move, it would actually be white that is worse. In fact, I think white is lost. White would have to move the king and allow your king to invade and start taking pawns first, or white could push this pawn, but once you take and the king takes, then our king still gets to the square e5 first, captures the first pawn, and black is in control. Black should win. So we have a funny name for this position. It's called reciprocal Zugzwang. Now you know Zugzwang, you've watched my ChessKid videos. That's when any move you make ruins your position. But reciprocal Zugzwang, sometimes we call it mutual Zugzwang. That means whoever moves loses, or at least whoever moves is sad about having to move. And in this position, it really is sad. Whoever moves absolutely loses the chess game. So in this position, if I was black, I would have looked for basically any other move than the move h6, because we can calculate fairly easily that white is going to run black out of moves. So taking a look at some options here, if you move your king anywhere, you just lose this pawn. That's not going to work out. I don't think pushing this pawn does a whole lot for you, because white can take, and when you take, then white can take here, and I think that's pretty good for white. So the last option, though, is to actually take this pawn. Pawn takes pawn. And then when white plays pawn takes, we have some ideas. Now, if you push this pawn, white will actually push and get a protected passed pawn. I'm not so sure that's great. Keep in mind, if you push, I don't think white should take, because when you take back, now it's actually white who has to move first. And I don't know if white's losing, but white's not winning anymore, because your king is going to invade. So let's go back to this position. I don't know that g6 works again because of f6, but maybe the move h6 is possible. Because now, if these pawns trade, black gets an outside pass pawn, which the white king has to run really far to stop. Oh, but wait a minute. There's this crazy move, f6, common idea in breakthroughs in king and pawn endgames. And now if we take this one, white takes the other one, and our king is too far away from this pawn to stop it. White will make a queen first. That's not going to work. And if we take this one, then white will take, and this pawn is still too far away for our king to stop. So h6 is not going to work. But what about h5? This is the idea that I was trying to show to my student. If you play h5, I actually thought that black was winning, because now if white takes en passant and then we take, black actually wins. The king has to run really far to catch our pawn. Meanwhile, we catch white's pawns easily, and after we take, we can just run back and win all the other pawns and win the game super easily. So In this position, I thought for sure it was a win. Notice this move doesn't work for white because after takes, even if white pushes, our king can move over to this position. And I was pretty happy with myself. But you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to look at all of my opponent's possibilities, just like I was looking at all of my possibilities. And it turns out there's an amazing one winning move for white, which totally doesn't make sense at first, but once I saw it and started analyzing it, it made more sense. White can actually win by playing g6. Now, how weird is that? We generally say when you're trying to make a pass pawn to push the unopposed pawn. This is white's unopposed pawn, right? There's no black pawn on the F file. But white actually pushes, and in this position, you almost never put your pawns like this because the black pawn seems like it's stopping both of white's pawns. Okay, but here's the problem. First of all, white has a real threat. If we push our pawn, for example, then white can play pawn to f6, and if we take, then this pawn makes a promotion. And if we go back, you might decide to get your king in, but then after pawn takes, these two pawns perfectly shield the black king. So we can see that white has an actual threat, which is to play the move f6. So what do we do? Well, if we play king e7 to stop the threat, then unfortunately for us, white can actually take, and white's king is inside the square of the pawn. Wow, you have to know a lot of king and pawn endgame concepts. The square of the pawn, remember, is found by counting how far up the board, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We know squares have equal length and width. And if I draw a little square, am I done? Come on, arrows, one more arrow, my pen almost ran out of ink. The white king is just barely inside the square of the pawn. The white king can catch this pawn. And unfortunately for black, if he plays a move like king f6 or something, then what white can do is play c4, and white's going to make a pass pawn over here on the queen side. And if black's king runs back and something like this happens, takes, and the king moves here, then white can make a pass pawn back over on the king side, and there's no way for this poor king to stop everything. So this amazing move, pawn to g6, I did not see it at first, but there's actually no answer at all. Now, one last try. If we play this move h4, f6 will happen anyway. We've already sort of mentioned that. So what else can we say for black? Not really anything. It's just a loss for black. Now, I will say this. If I was black, I still think this is the best move. You might say, but Fun Master Mike, it loses. Yeah, but every other move loses also. And if you do this maneuver and play the move h5, you force your opponent to find the very difficult move g6. And part of chess is not just looking at the computer and saying, oh, white wins. It's also putting your opponent in a position where they have to play really precisely to beat you, because not many players can do that. This was a crazy complicated king and pawn endgame that even I had to learn from. I hope, chess kids, you understand the value of studying your endgames, because as you improve in chess, sometimes your games will come down to these one little moments.